Hello, everyone, and welcome back. If you were here earlier to
Mm.
our virtual summit, we're joined now by Carol Walker, who I'm sure most of you are aware of who she is. Wonderful photographer, great wild horse advocate. She has books, she has podcasts, she's got pictures. She's got a lot of information to share also today. So we look forward to that. I also wanted to let everybody know, just as a reminder, everyone is muted. Your videos are turned off. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get them all answered after Carol's presentation. And again, thank you, Carol, for being here, and thank you, everyone, for coming back again.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. I really appreciate it. And just to let everybody know, I really do like questions, so please do ask them. And I'll get started here. Here we go. All right. Okay. So this is me and my adopted Mustang, Helios there. And the saving part is a work in progress. So um, I'll talk about the checkerboard. I'll talk about the lawsuit that's ongoing right now to save the Saltwells Creek horses. And I'll also talk about curlies. And I'll have lots of pictures of some of my favorite curlies. And then I'll end on talking about going out to the range and seeing them. So I'll just go ahead and get started here. So, where my journey began was in Adobe Town. First time I ever saw wild horses was 2004 in the spring. And I immediately fell in love with these horses. And I spent as much time out there as I could until there was a roundup in 2005 in the fall. And they took most of the horses. And it was just especially heartbreaking. I didn't even know what was going on before this. And I decided I needed to do something to help these horses. And I really felt it was a responsibility that I wasn't just going out there and spending time with them and taking pictures for myself, but I felt like I needed to help them. And so it's been a long journey and it's continuing. And Adobe Town is about almost 500,000 acres and has very little of the checkerboard in it. And I'll talk more about the checkerboard. I did spend time from the beginning in Saltwells Creek, but it's over 1 million acres. It's a huge area. And most of the time that I spent in Saltwells back in those days was in the areas adjoining Adobe Town, and I never saw a curly. So here's the checkerboard. Um, it is in White Mountain, Great Divide Basin, Saltwells Creek, and Adobe Town. And what it is it's a pattern of 1 mile squares of public-private land. And it was set up at the time in the 1870s when the government put the railroad through. And the reason they did it was to raise money for the railroad. So they sold off these parcels of land. And it has since become a nightmare because really what should have happened a long time ago was they should have done land swaps to consolidate the public land, but they never did. And the Rock Springs Grazing Association owns almost all of the private land, and they have grazing leases on almost all of the public land as well. So they really have a monopoly in the area, and they have very little interest in consolidating the public lands. And back in 2011, they decided that they had had it with the wild horses. The BLM wasn't rounding them up quickly enough. There were too many in the area. So they went ahead and filed their first lawsuit. And now it's been 14 years, and I think it's been 7 lawsuits. And I've been a plaintiff on all of them. And we've been really working as hard as we can to save these areas because what the Grazing Association wanted to do was just zero out all the wild horses from the very beginning. And most recently, what's happened is in 2023, they finally came out with a new resource management plan, which included leaving 0 horses in Great Divide Basin, Saltwells Creek, and a third of Adobe Town. And these are the areas where the checkerboard is. And so we filed a suit 2 days after it was issued, and we actually lost in district court. We appealed to the 10th Circuit Court, and the 10th Circuit Court finally came back and said, you cannot, to the BLM, you cannot do this because part of what you are supposed to do with wild horses is you're supposed to protect a thriving natural balance, ecological balance, and you have not proven that removing them will do this. So they threw it back to the district court. So we're back in court again. And in the meantime, before the 10th Circuit ruled, the BLM had scheduled a roundup to go ahead and start zeroing out these horses, even though the lawsuit hadn't been finished, which was just crazy. We filed another lawsuit to try to stop them from starting the roundup, which was supposed to start in July, got postponed to August, and then finally it got postponed till this coming summer at the very earliest. We're hoping that we hear something from district court before then, but there's no guarantees. And also, my concern is that the BLM is just going to try to change around how they're doing it and still proceed anyway. So it's been a very long battle, and people are always asking me, what can I do to help? And I would say one of the main things is to donate money to the legal fund. The plaintiffs are American Wild Horse Conservation, Animal Welfare Institute, Western Watersheds Project, me, Kimberly Curl, and Chad Hansen. And there are two other groups that also have lawsuits, Friends of Animals and Return to Freedom. And at this point, I really think that the legal battle is the only thing that has and will continue to keep these horses out there on our public lands. And the issue also is if we lose and they zero out these herds, they are going to aggressively go ahead and do this everywhere else. And so it's not just Wyoming. So that's why it's so important. And of course, the checkerboard herds, two of the checkerboard herds, White Mountain and Saltwells Creek, are very popular with the locals and with people across the country visiting these horses. People care about these horses. People want to see these horses. And so the whole idea that 24 families in the Grazing Association have decided that they want the horses gone, and the horses belong to us, the American people, and they don't just, the land doesn't belong to these ranchers. The private land does, but not the public land. So here is a map of these. The maps that I'm putting up are all BLM maps. They're all from the environmental assessments that they've done for different roundups. So as you can see, Saltwells Creek has quite a bit of checkerboard in it. It has more than the other herd areas. And in the southern part, you can see there's no checkerboard, and a very large group of the horses have been down below the checkerboard. They move. Wild horses don't stay in one place. They do move north in the winter, but they are predominantly below the checkerboard. So, in my opinion, there could be something done with land swaps and consolidation and keeping the horses in one area instead of just removing them entirely. Okay. So the first curly I ever met was Maestro, and you might have heard of him. He was very popular locally. People love Maestro. What could be better than a curly pinto? And I encountered him and his family and a few other families right before the 2017 roundup, like just 2 days before they started. And they removed him, and they released a whole bunch of not a whole bunch, but they released some curly mares and some curly stallions, but not Maestro. And so I said, well, why, to the wild horse and burro expert, why didn't you release him? He's so popular. People love him. Oh, well, he takes his family across the highway. So he was not released. He is now at Skydog Sanctuary. So this is the roundup, and it was an incredibly windy day, and I was standing on a cliff and trying not to get blown over. And you can see him; he's quite distinctive coming into the trap. So the most recent roundup of this area was in 2021. Adobe Town, Saltwell Creek, and Great Divide Basin, and 4161 horses were rounded up. 659 were returned to the range, and 37 horses died. It was horrible. It went on for 4 months. It was unbelievable. And unfortunately, the weather cooperated with the BLM, and they were able to get all these horses. So the areas that they hit the hardest were the eastern part of Saltwell Creek that I mentioned that I used to spend time in. And I do believe this was a strategy because they wanted to make sure that most of the horses were left were in one area. So they let's see here. These are some of the stallions that were returned to Saltwell Creek, and you might recognize Bubba and Medicine Man, and that's Red Cloud, and also Teton, who is a relative of Maestro but not a son, and Cosmo, and a few others. I got to see them get released, and I was, of course, very happy to see that, and but very sad for the horses that were not. So curly horses. So you can see this curly stallion and his very curly son. And I really didn't know anything about curlies. And Bubba was the first wild curly stallion I spent time with. He had these long curling ringlets of mane and a thick coat, and he was amazing. And when he ran, the ground shook. But he was this big, gentle giant, and he loved his family so much. And he passed away 2 years ago, and it was kind of heartbreaking. But he did get released, and he had another few years of life out on the range. Um, and so the other thing that I noted that I was interested to find out is that there's degrees of curliness. And Julian, who is a little curly Carmelo colt when I met him, but now he's a big stallion, and looked like a lamb. And he had curls in his ears, and he was just this dense coat. And then as he got older in the summertime, his coat would like thin out so much, and his tail would also kind of disappear. It was just kind of became kind of stick-like, and the hair would go. And this apparently is pretty common. And with extreme curlies, they lose their tails entirely, and sometimes it looks like their skin can like peel off like a bison. It's a very interesting thing. And then some horses, like Jack of Hearts, and I'll have pictures of all these so that you'll be able to see them. Um, he has a very curly mane, but his coat isn't that curly. So it just depends. And they tend to be much curlier and thicker and denser in the winter than in the summer. So, on doing some research, I found that there's an international organization that has a registry and history posted on their website, the International Curly Horse Organization, and they call them North American Curly Horses. And there's also the American Bashkir Curly Registry that calls them the American Bashkir Curly Horse, but it's found to be unlikely that the Russian Bashkir horse is an ancestor of them. It seems to be a mystery how they came to North America, but the earliest documentation was the Sioux Indians had stolen some curly horses from the Crow in 1801 to 1802, and they can be traced to reservations in South and North Dakota. And both organizations agree that the first modern day documentation dates to 1898 in central Nevada with the Damley family, who's captured wild curly horses and began a breeding program. They'd observed that they were really hardy and that they were sometimes the lone survivors after really harsh winters in 1932 and 1951. And they bred curlies with other breeds, and then these horses were the foundation of the current breed. Wild curlies are in Nevada, and there are two herds in Wyoming. But after the devastating roundup in 2024 in White Mountain, there's just a handful left. So Saltwell's Creek has the bulk of the wild curly horses in this country. And according to ICHO, the wild curlies in Wyoming are only in the Rock Springs area. And they're a unique pocket of curlies with they're solidly built with excellent temperaments, and they're also hypoallergenic. And the Rock Springs curlies can be traced back to a famous curly horse, the Laramie Stud. He was purchased from a horse trader in Laramie between 1942 and 1945 by a man named Isaac Newton Brooks. The Laramie Stud is the father of a curly stallion that is named Rocket. And he's the foundation sire of the Rock Springs Curlies. And these horses belonged to Ike and his nephew John Knaps, but when the BLM no longer allowed ranchers to use the land for horse breeding, the remnants of the herd became the Rock Springs Wild Curlies. And some were shipped back east in the 50s. And through genetic testing, there's proof that the Saltwell's Curly line carries the curly gene KRT25, as does the Nevada Curlies. So it's a genetic thing that the Curlies have. And I remember seeing two magnificent stallions, one bay and one black, who looked so much like the Knights horses at the BLM holding facility in Rock Springs in 2014 after a roundup. And they were being saved for a breeder of curlies back east. So the BLM no longer allows people to adopt intact stallions, so they don't do that anymore. In 2021, after the roundup, curiously, there were no curlies to be seen or to be adopted after the roundup. And I even asked in Wheatland, where are the curlies? What happened to the curlies? Oh, we don't really have any. They shipped them to Texas. I don't know why. And I know of one BLM staff member who got one. So they are very prized and they're very hard to get. Um, so in um, yeah, so the the entire herd is not curly. So the vast majority of the wild horses in Saltwell's Creek are not curly. But there are quite a few curlies. And the other interesting thing is sometimes a curly mare will not have a curly foal. And sometimes she does. And I don't really know why that is. And the other thing is, the curliness seems to relax as they age. So the oldest horses, Bobby, I think, is the oldest wild curly that I know of. And he's in his 20s somewhere, and he doesn't really look curly anymore. So they're very interesting. This is Turin, Bobby's son, and he was born this year. And he's very curly, and his mom, Mysterious, is curly. But his sister, who was out of a mare that wasn't curly, Suri, she's not curly. So it's interesting. This is an example of an extreme curly. I actually don't know his name, but he's a great example. He has, look at his tail. It's there's like nothing there, and it gets bushier in the winter, and you can see how thin his coat is, and they're just really interesting. These are some pictures of Bubba, who I just absolutely adored, and he was really fun to spend time with and really, really gorgeous. And his family was taken over by Scarface, who you can see him and Scarface down there at the bottom. And so he has some offspring in Saltwell's Creek, which is great. Here's some more Bubba pictures. Just probably the most photogenic horse I've ever photographed. He was amazing. This is Red Cloud, And he was also rounded up and released in 2021. And he has a family and he tends to hang out with another stallion and his family, Ike. And so they come in all colors. And then you have Rocket. He's also an older stallion, and he's one of the few black curly stallions. And that's him there with his son. This is Avalon, the only Pinto curly I know of right now on the range. And she was a yearling the first time I saw her. And she's just stunning. And now, seen her recently, and you really can't even tell that she's curly. So that she's one of the ones that got less curly looking. This is Sawyer, and he's a stunning young stallion, and he has a big band right now. And he's, you can see, it's most, you can see it in his coat, but it's most visible in his mane. This is Legacy, and this is his summer coat. And you can see how dense and thick it is and wavy, and he's just amazing looking. And he's a brown, he's brown, and he has a family of sorrels, lots of sorrels, just lots of sorrels. So it's funny how stallions have color preferences sometimes. This is Dollar. He's one of only two gray curly stallions. And he has a very large family, almost all sorrel. And he has those wonderful ringlets. And his you can see his coat doesn't look as curly, but his mane certainly is. And then here's Jack of Hearts, who's a lot of people's favorite, and he's just an amazing stallion. And he has those gorgeous blue eyes, and that's Ace of Hearts with him, his son, at the water hole. And then he's there with his lead mare, and he lost quite a bit of his family this year, but he's still going strong. He's not that old, and he's definitely one of the easier horses to spot in Saltwell's Creek. And here are two of his colts in 2024. I called them the Jacklets because they, looked so much like him, and they're very curly. Here we go. Zorro, he's very distinct because he has the bent ear, and he didn't have a family. I think he has mares now. I can't tell. I don't know, but he's also a curly, and he tends to keep to himself. And then here's Julian, my favorite. He was such an adorable little colt, and I was like, as many of you may know, I love Carmelos. So when he was born, I was like, a curly Carmelo, how is that even possible? And he's grown up really beautifully, and he's in the most unorthodox family I've ever seen. It's him and three other stallions, a gray mare, her yearling, and her foal. So they all seem to get along, and I guess it's part of that mellow, curly personality. This is Cyrus, and he's a bachelor, and he loves to cause trouble. So he's very entertaining to watch. And this is him at a spring. So the horses get water from there's springs, and there's a creek, and there's a couple of water holes. Well, more than a couple, many water holes. So they get their water from a lot of different sources. And this year, because things were so dry, horses were in areas I had never seen them in before, and had to spend quite a lot of time trying to figure out where they were. And so, where the horses go is very dependent on seasons, on what water's available. So it depends on a lot of different things. This is Bello. He's one of the icons of Salwell's Creek. He's just stunning. And this was the first time I'd encountered Bello. And he has a big family, and he seems to be a pretty mellow guy. And he has a lot of offspring in Saltwell's Creek. And I just love his eyes. This is Ike. He is another icon of Saltwell Creek and has a lot of offspring. And I seem to have the best luck of finding him at the waterhole. Not other places, but at the waterhole. And he's just a stunning stallion and very protective of his family. He's really entertaining to watch. And this is Bobby. He's probably the oldest stallion there, and he still has a family, which is pretty amazing. He's somewhere in his 20s, and he has a stunning family. And this is the curly baby is Tristan, and he was born last year, and he's now a yearling. And I very much enjoy watching him, and he has made a huge contribution to the curlies in this herd. So I had last year I had a lot of people asking me about maps, and so when you go out to see the horses, I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend you never go out when it's really wet because you can get stuck and you can destroy the road, which is not a good thing. And in the summer, be careful when you're going on two tracks. I mean, you either want to go on the road or a two track. You do not want to go off-roading because you'll destroy, the fragile ecosystem. And the newer cars, especially, get really hot in the summer, and you could cause a brush fire. And I know nobody wants to cause a brush fire out on the horse range. And so, um, it, with this area getting more and more popular, and more people going out there, I think we all need to be considerate to the landscape, to the horses, to each other, and try to tread as lightly as you can. And these horses in this herd are pretty used to people, most of them. Um, some of them stay as far away as they possibly can, so they're very seldom seen. But it doesn't mean you want to walk right up to them. It doesn't mean you want them to walk right up to you. You need to keep your distance and, preserve their wildness. If there's foals being born, you want to stay far away. And yeah, so that would be what I would say. And sometimes it's funny because in Adobe Town, I would drive up and I'd see some horses and I'd drive up and I'd get out of my car. Sometimes the horses would be gone by the time I shut the door. They were that skittish and not used to people or didn't want to be around people. But they always paid attention. And sometimes the Saltwells Creek horses will just ignore you completely. So it's just interesting from herd management area to herd management area, the reactions of the horses. So the Wyoming Atlas and Gazetteer, I think, has the best maps. So you can get it from Amazon or from a gas station in Wyoming, and they have really good maps in there of the areas. And if you want maps of the horse range, so the BLM, took down all of this information. I think it was 2015 from the websites. They used to have maps of the horse areas. They don't have those anymore. But Brenda is really good with maps, and she documents where she goes. And she was willing to let me point you in her direction. So that's her email and her Instagram handle. And she said she's planning to release a field guide in March, which is awesome. So I highly recommend you get it. And then here's me. My blog and education website is wildhoofbeats.com. My fine art website is livingimagescarolwalker.com. And then my podcast is Freedom for Wild Horses, and you can get it anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also find it on YouTube. So that's really all I had to say today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Carol. That was amazing. So I'll just go through the chat and some of the questions in there. People really enjoyed your photography, so thank you for sharing that also. Um, so Isabel wants to know, did you know Goliath and his family when they were still on the range?
No, I did not. And so Goliath was captured in 2017. And as I said, right before the roundup was when I encountered Maestro for the first time. And yeah, so I didn't know Goliath.
Angela was asking, and there was some discussion, but maybe you can explain this clearer. How can the BLM return to district court when the 10th Circuit Court already ruled against their removal plan?
Because the 10th Circuit Court referred it to the district court. Actually, on my link in Instagram, there's a link to the hearing, so you can actually listen to the whole thing. So they referred the case back to district court instead of just saying outright that they couldn't remove the horses. So that's unfortunate. So that's why we're back in court again with the same judge, Justice Roberts. So I yeah, and I don't know when that's going to be. I would think sometime this spring. Everything got stopped during the government shutdown. So everything was just on hold because, the BLM wasn't, their lawyers weren't working. So everything's kind of slower than we had hoped.
Mary says, thank you for being a plaintiff 7 times. Have you ever hesitated, or what compelled you to decide to do so?
No, no, I never hesitated. And so, of course, the big organizations like Animal Welfare Institute and American Wild Horse Conservation are the ones and Western Watersheds are the ones putting up money for the lawsuits. I'm basically for standing. So my experience on the range and with the horses and everything like that adds to the lawsuit, gives us standing. So for me, anything I can do to keep those horses out there, I'm going to do it. So no, I didn't have any hesitation.
Craig wants to know, is it legal for the BLM to remove the maps and directions and basic descriptions of the various wild horse herds, like from their websites, like you were saying?
Is it legal? I Probably because it's their information, their websites. Their excuse was that they were changing to a new system and a new server and all this other stuff, but basically they just took down as much information as they possibly could. It was horrible. We were frantically snatching information off of the websites while they were doing it. And it was, because they should have on for all the herds, they should have information and directions so people can go see the horses. I don't think there's any reason not to.
How many acres, or how big is Saltwell's Creek, did you say?
Yeah, I've got the actual figure written down here. It's over 1 million acres. So, um, 690,000 federal acres and 480,000 private acres. And if you have never been in a large herd management area, it's amazing how big everything is. It really is. I mean, that's a lot of land. And to say that there's not enough grazing for the horses and for the elk and the deer is just crazy. So, and as you saw in my pictures, did you see any thin horses? No, these horses are in very good condition and there's plenty of forage, plenty of water, and plenty for the other wildlife that's there, even in a dry year.
I've been there, and it's amazing, and it's just amazing just to be on such a big piece of public land. And
Mm.
I always say, like, there are places here in North Dakota where, like, and you'll understand this, like, you can hear the quiet, you know what I mean?
Mm.
There it was like amplified by anything I've ever, like, it just was so beautiful. And I agree with you, there is so much land there. I don't understand how they can even justify this, but Angela said, so if it goes back to the same judge in district court, are the Curleys doomed, or what possible outcomes are there?
Well, he'll probably give the BLM a chance to change what they're doing, and they may just come up with some data saying that there's a thriving natural ecological balance if the horses are removed. I don't know. It is. very possible that we will end up back in appeals court. It's crazy. It would be nice if we could do the land swaps. It really would. It would be nice if we could come to some sort of accommodation with the grazing association, but I don't think they will.
Brenda wants to know if you can share a little bit more about what other wildlife are at Salt Walls Creek.
Sure. Well, so there's definitely the pronghorn do their winter migration through Saltwells Creek and Adobe Town and Great Divide Basin. So they become more numerous in the winter, but they're there year round. There's deer, there's elk, there's coyotes. Um, I it's not really mountain lion terrain, but it is possible that they're out there. And there's all sorts of little critters like prairie dogs and all the ground animals as well. And there's all the birds and the hawks and eagles and all sorts of animals out there. It's just amazing spending time out there, and it is so peaceful and so beautiful. And but the horses are I'm usually pretty single-minded and intent on finding the horses.
Krista wants to know if you can repeat the acreage again of Salt Walls Creek.
Sure. It's 690,000 federal acres that are public lands, and then 480,000 private lands.
Oh,
And of
it's
course, there's livestock grazing. So the Rock Springs Grazing Association is not just cattle. They started out only sheep, in fact, when they were first starting. And so there's sheep and there's cattle out there. And there are, I think I have the AUM's numbers. I think there's like 150,000 cattle and sheep AUMs. So, and there's also sage grouse. Sorry, forgot about the sage grouse, which are protected, and their numbers decreasing. They always blame the wild horses, but the horses don't mess with the sage grouse. And they in Wyoming they hunt sage grouse. They also hunt sage grouse in Colorado. I was like, if they want to protect them, why are they hunting them? But that's the BLM.
Mary says, I agree that litigation is the only answer. The BLM and DOI seem to blatantly disregard the federal law. No amount of pleading, advocating, rationale, education, compromises improve things for our wild horses. Some fear litigation, say it's distasteful, but the powers that be seem only to recognize it. So
Yeah, I mean, if we hadn't started litigating back in 2011, these horses would be gone already. So at least we've granted them a reprieve. And the really sad thing was in White Mountain, they were originally going to sterilize the herd, and then because there was so much public outcry, because that is right next to Rock Springs, and it's a major tourist attraction. They said, okay, we'll leave White Mountain. So what they did was they went in and did a roundup where they took almost every single horse. It was crazy. So, let's just be underhanded about everything.
Ginger says, when we were at Salt Walls Creek last summer, it was like you said, the horses just ignored us. It was hard to keep an appropriate distance because they would just walk by um, without any concern. Do you think this will cause a bigger problem if they do go ahead with the roundup? I can't imagine their utter confusion. It'd be heartbreaking.
Well, it's heartbreaking always for these horses, no matter what. Um, I have heard from Steve Mannell, who has a training program for the wild horses, and he always takes some of the BLM horses and trains them under saddle and stuff like that. And the Saltwells Creek and the Adobe Town horses are his favorites. He says they're the easiest to train. So e- take it with a grain of salt. And the curlies, because of their disposition, they tend to be a little bit easier. But going ahead and, I I think it's important to show pictures of these curlies because I don't want them to just disappear into BLM hands and nobody ever gets to adopt them if they are rounded up. Um, yeah.
Craig wants to know, do you have great flower blooms in spring and summer at Salt Walls Creek?
Sometimes it depends on how dry it is. They're beautiful purple and yellow blooms at different times of the year. And but it's not like it's not like an area where there's a super bloom because the rainfall amounts are so low. I mean, this is the high desert, so it doesn't tend to be lushly flowered.
Isabella said this litigation stuff sounds like what WHE is going through with Devil's Garden. Just so you guys know too, we have someone next weekend, Mary Council, will be speaking about the Devil's Garden herd, and um,
Right.
she actually had me push her presentation back because they're hoping to have some information this week. So hopefully she's got, I know she'll have an update, so hopefully there's even more to say.
That's
Um,
great.
So yeah, that's all I have. So thank you again, Carol. This was great and really good information. And thank you for sharing all the litigation information. And I know you'll keep us updated through your website. Um, well, someone just had another question. Oh, Craig, do you think this curly trait is unique to North America or North America origin among the horses?
Well, it is unique. Where it came from is not clear, but it seems to be unique. And but there are Russian curly horses, but I don't think they're related. But I don't know. So
Who did you say needs donations for the lawsuit? You said American Wild Horse
everybody,
Conservation,
American Wild
American.
Horse Conservation, Animal Welfare Institute, and Western Watersheds are
Okay.
the three biggies in our. They're the ones that are putting out the money for the attorneys, and it's Eubanks and Associates who are doing a fantastic job. Bill Eubanks has been our attorney throughout this whole thing, and he's been doing an excellent job.
All right. Everyone's just saying thank you and really enjoyed your photography and all your insights. So thank you again, Carol. And we'll be back next weekend. We have 8 different presentations from Friday to Monday. So just go to our website at chwha.org. I also am going through and putting the videos on the website. As soon as we get them, they're on our YouTube channel and they're on the same website so that you can just click on the person and it'll take you right to the YouTube link. So I hope that you guys are enjoying this and keep watching the website because we do have some updates that we will be putting on and some new presentations we'll be adding. And again, thank you, Carol, very much. And thank you everybody for being a part of this.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody who attended, and thanks for all the great questions.
Thank you. Everyone have a good night.